Guys, I urge you, if you want fantastic content, wonderful reviews, and an amazing podcast, please check out SkillUp's channel. We've been on the Friends Per Second podcast with them, and it's chocked full of information that's important to us in the gaming community. With that being said, though, this past week, Jason Schreier was a guest. Now, Jason Schreier is an American journalist who primarily covers the gaming industry. He's notorious for insider scoops, covering many investigative stories, particularly on crunch culture in the games industry. He has authored 2 books, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, and Press Reset, which delves into the depth of major company work cultures. He's announced a 3rd book called Play Nice, which is releasing October the 8th, which will speak on the rise and fall of Blizzard Entertainment. Jason is an incredibly reliable and accurate journalist, and his work is respected by many. And what he does in this interview is essentially paint us a picture of what's going on with Bungie internally. Today, guys, we're going to go through everything that was covered from Jason. So without further ado, let's begin. Now, I was asked what the overall story was to just set everybody up contextually. Jason begins by saying, going back to the pandemic times, 2020 to 2021, there was a ton of growth all at once in the video game industry. Pretty much every game is doing well. All of these online games especially are doing exceptionally well. At the same time, interest rates are super low and a lot of the big game companies are flush with cash. They're also thinking this pandemic growth will never end. And they decide, hey, we're gonna make some acquisitions. Microsoft buys Activision Blizzard for $69 billion. Sony also purchased Bungie for $3.6 billion. Now, Schreier notes that around the time of the acquisition, Bungie's employee count was somewhere between 800 to 900 employees. He also states that Bungie goes on an intense hiring spree, where most of these hires are going towards incubation projects, not Destiny. Now, a few years after the pandemic, it becomes apparent that this massive hiring spree led to a size that was unsustainable, on top of hitting times of higher interest rates. At the same time, Lightfall is a severe miss, damaging player sentiment and causing a significant revenue loss. That's when Pete Parsons holds a meeting announcing Bungie had missed revenue projections by 45%. Bungie is losing a lot of money and has pressure from the higher-ups, which takes us to present day, where Bungie decides to cut their incubation projects and positions associated with them, slimming down to focus on just Destiny and just Marathon. Now, next question. One of the things that came through Steven Totila's GameFile reporting on this was the idea that Bungie sort of overpromised to Sony in that acquisition, that they overstated their earnings potential on the future. And what Ralph really asked here was, in his discussion with anyone inside Bungie, did that come up, as in the quote-unquote over-promising from Schreier? That's not something that I can back up, but I'll certainly trust Steven. Steven's a great reporter, and his story on GameFile is well worth checking out. Now, the next question. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about Pete Parsons' role within all of this. How are people talking about his role in these decisions? How are they feeling towards him at this point, especially given all that stuff that came out about his core collection? Jason implies that I think Pete was generally a pretty well-liked guy from what I've gathered. He was someone who certainly seemed to a lot of people at Bungie like he was standing up for what was right. He was on the front lines with people marching during the Black Lives Matter protests. He was out there at protests, was tweeting pictures of himself, and I think he won some favor there. He's been outspoken about progressive issues, and I think that resonates with a lot of Bungie people. But he also led them to this position as the CEO. Schreier mentions that there's actually a logic behind having many incubation projects, describing it as not wanting all of your eggs in one basket. But he mentions the reason this may have left a bad taste in so many people's mouths is that, number one, Pete Parsons hasn't really taken accountability. Number two, he still has a job, while several hundred developers no longer do. And number three, the messaging from leadership to the company that, quote, counting on the final shape didn't seem to matter, as despite the success of the final shape, many developers were still laid off. Now, Schreier feels as though the core aspect is the wrong angle, that instead people should be looking at his decisions as a leader more. However, he does state that it looks poor when all these people are laid off, especially if he's talking about his new vintage cars with those people just a few days before the layoffs went out. It's poor taste, without a doubt. I'm kind of in the same boat, guys. Like, I really don't care what you guys spend money on, like CEOs, CFOs, board members. It doesn't really matter to me. I think at the end of the day, taking a humble approach and not blasting that in front of everybody is probably your best bet. And number two, even though being super progressive and standing up for social issues is a cool thing, at the end of the day, just making sure people got jobs, making good long-term decisions for the company, that should come first. And obviously the decisions that were made here were not good decisions. They were not good bets. Next question. Are you saying that Pete Parsons was putting out this message during the development of the final shape? Quote, hey guys, we really need this to pop. We really need this to be great. But then in your reporting, you said that the decision to make these cuts were actually made in advance of the final shape's release. Now, Schreier says, yeah, Totila reported on this as well, and that's something that he had heard. But he did clarify that the layoffs were in the works a month before the layoff occurred. So it happened after the final shape. But he also mentioned that it was clear that this streamlining was going to occur regardless of the final shape's outcome. So around this topic, guys, it seems a bit fuzzy. He said that Bungie's staff held a meeting, though, containing graphs that showed annual expansions that were declining in sales year over year. And this is part of what led them to move away from the annual expansion model. Now, he mentions that no matter what the success of the final shape was going to be, it was not going to be enough to save all these jobs. Now, he mentions that Sony's chairman, though, took a very rare move and criticized Bungie publicly just a few months ago. This is back in February, by the way. And you don't see this often, but he came out and said that Bungie needed to be more efficient. And he said from this messaging, it was pretty clear that layoffs were going to occur at some point, as he called it, reading the tea leaves. It was a very interesting move from Sony's chairman, by the way, because in that call, the translator didn't specify Bungie, and then Sony's chairman came out like right afterwards. It was like, no, let me clarify. I mean this about Bungie. So the fact that he doubled down on it and publicly called out Bungie, it's kind of crazy. You don't see that often. Most of the times, higher ups keep that stuff behind closed doors just to save face, but to kind of have like that public denouncement there and to double down gives you kind of a peek of what Sony thinks. Now, next question. Ralph mentioned it's an interesting point about the annual expansions declining year over year. He goes on to say, I'm interested to know in your discussions with Bungie staff, was there any sense of how Bungie got to that point? Why was Destiny not growing? Did staff have anything to say on that? Jason replies that I think the biggest one is just that Destiny is long in the tooth. Every online game is going to have a peak and then fall. World of Warcraft hit a peak of 12 million subscribers way back when and just went down from there and has not even hit close to those heights again. A lot of these online games follow similar trajectories. It's not super shocking, especially with a game like Destiny 2, where as much as people have enjoyed the expansions, it is still fundamentally the same game. Probably the biggest factor is that there's no onboard ramp for new players. It's a very difficult game, almost impenetrable for new players because of all the different types of gear and proper nouns. The Schreier re-highlights how the lack of proper onboarding has significantly cut off the potential player base. He also draws attention to how you can't even play the full story of Destiny 2, saying you have to have been there for the release. That is true. I really wish that wasn't a thing. Now, he also mentions how the final shape was cool, but cool for people who already have a vested interest in the game. No one was out there saying this is the best time to get into Destiny 2. Well, I do believe the final shape was the best expansion Bungie's ever done, and to me, it was a love letter to the veteran players, whereas Lightfall was more of a slap to the veteran players. Now, I also want to mention here that a game can be incredibly niche and still be extremely profitable and maintain that profitability for years. However, taking one game and using that game to essentially finance 3 to 4 other games, holy hell, what an impossible task. Now, Ralph goes on to state that as a player, which Ralph literally plays every expansion and has been a diehard Destiny player since the very beginning. But he said having no more paid annual expansions is a big bummer. Those were a big deal for us. Did you, in your discussions with any Bungie staff, did they have a view on what that means to them? Jason says, I don't think a lot of people are bummed out about it. They're not going to have to keep doing these paid expansions, these annual expansions. I think the cadence is really tough. In fact, if you look at the history of them, the ones that were best received were also the ones that had to slip beyond the yearly cadence. He highlights that both the Witch Queen and the Final Shape are critically acclaimed and were 2 expansions that were delayed. Witch Queen went from release of 2021 to February 2022. The Final Shape went from March of 2024 to June of 2024. Now, he also says that Bungie devs have a lot of respect for Tyson Green. This is the new game director for Destiny 2. This dude is a long-term veteran. And personally, I'm not going to give up on Destiny. Really, probably not until Bungie's like literally like, hey, we're done. But until Tyson Green goes, I still have faith. As a matter of fact, Jason states that Bungie developers are optimistic about the future. He did state that there will be some sort of paid content in the short future, but Jason doesn't know exactly what it will be. He also said that there will be a refactoring of ritual activities. He's not 100% sure what that means, but it sounds like a big shakeup to our ritual activities. And there's going to be some sort of new onboarding experience, but no new details as to what that is. Now, the more human aspect, Bungie has lost a lot of people over the last few years. The people left have to cover the jobs that were left behind. Now, listen, guys, I've said it for so long. If Bungie needs to cook for a year and a half, maybe even longer than that for an annual expansion, I'm completely okay with that. If it means more Witch Queens, more Final Shapes, absolutely. Now, higher ups at Bungie don't like that. that because that is deferred revenue and they want to be able to squeeze it out every single year. Now, as far as onboarding players, what the content layout is, honestly, guys, that's going to be an entirely different video from us. I do want to talk about that at some point, but that's an approach we need to take for an entire video to itself. Now, moving on to our next question. It was then asked, what is the temperature check on how Marathon is going? And we covered this the other day already, but from Jason Schreier, not great from what I've heard. There's a reason that it was planned for this year and slipped a whole year. And people that I've talked to are a little pessimistic about it even hitting its current planned deadline. Now, this was the most damning quote from Jason. Quote, the Marathon story kind of reminds me of Suicide Squad. And the reason for that is because Suicide Squad started development in 2017 when live services was the hot new thing. Because of sunk cost fallacy, endless delays, and because there wasn't really an interest or willingness in canceling it because they had committed so much money to it, there was just this belief that, all right, we want to get this out, it's going to be cool. And it came out and just totally flopped. Jason says that he's worried about Marathon being in a similar situation where it's been in development for a while. It entered development when extraction shooters were super hot, and by the time it comes out, he doesn't know if that's going to be the case anymore. That's a fair assessment, guys. We've seen developers in the past, companies literally go under because they chase trends. I saw developers turn around and do hero shooters as soon as Overwatch blew up, and then try to turn around and do a battle royale when Fortnite blew up. And here was the problem. Those developers had no experience in either one of those genres, and it bit them in the dick. So much so that 3 of those companies that I'm talking about right now are no longer with us. Chasing trends is a dangerous game to play, especially considering the time it takes to develop these games. Now, the next question, could you tell us what Payback was and what happened to it? Now, from Jason here. Payback was a project that Luke Smith and Mark Noseworthy, who are no longer with the company, were helming. And the idea was it would be a third-person game. It was co-op heavy and PvE mostly, exploring a world and just doing challenges and stuff together. I think the idea of the core gimmick of it was that you play as characters from Destiny. Now, Schreier says that the game was taking inspiration from Genshin and Warframe in the way that you have different heroes that you can swap between. But he did mention that the monetization was not going to be gacha. But he also stated that many Destiny spin-offs were incubated and canceled as the question, what comes after Destiny 2, was raised. And they said that they still don't have an answer to this question. Now, next it was brought up that Parsons said in the blog post when announcing the layoffs that they were in the red. Essentially, Bungie was not profitable. And that's something that Sony is not going to tolerate for very long. Is there any inkling as to anything changing up with the relationship between Bungie and Sony? From Jason here, I think that's been a little bit overblown. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't talked to people on Bungie's board. I think they're the ones who would really have insight on this. I don't know that there's as much of a clear divide between Sony and Bungie to the point where it would really be like, uh-oh, man, all these Sony people are coming in and they're really going to change our culture. In fact, I would say that if you look at PlayStation, they have a pretty healthy first-party stable of studios. They tend to give those teams a lot of time, leeway, and creativity, despite other than like the recent service game chasing. I don't really think that Herman Hulst coming in and saying, I'm in charge now, is going to have much of an effect, other than a bunch of old school Bungie people getting mad and leaving, which could be healthy for the studio anyway. Now, Schreier doubles down on this and says that the talk about Bungie's autonomy is overstated. The relationship between Bungie and Sony is that Bungie is very much a subsidiary. This is not a situation where Bungie has enough clout to push back against Sony. Now, as many of us saw between Activision and Bungie, there was definitely that kind of relationship. Things were not easy going. And just from my first-hand experience being around Activision and Bungie in the same studio, it seemed a bit tense. Just letting y'all know. Now, however the relationship is between Bungie and Sony, we don't know. Like, I don't know. I'm not on their board. I think the only thing that we've seen is really the comments that were made from Sony back in February, which were not good comments, and the doubling down on that. Now, I do want to mention some additional points that Schreier made. He mentioned that the games industry has always had an issue with trend chasing, but it's pretty bad with the live service games. He brought up companies that chased the success of games like Fortnite, Fall Guys, etc. And that these games all came out and had hit after hit, success after success. And he's glad Naughty Dog didn't fall for sunk cost fallacy and did in fact cancel their live service project, as it could have ended up looking like another Suicide Squad. So that's it, guys. That is the Bungie portion of the Friends Per Second podcast. I urge you, please go check it out. In the least, if you can go over there and like this video, that would be fantastic. It's podcasts like these that allow us to get insight into what's happening into the game world, and we greatly appreciate it. As for us, in the coming days, I will be making 2 videos. One video will be essentially my assessment for the future. And let me just say, that's not going to be from the perspective as a content creator or a streamer. It's really going to be from a perspective as a Destiny player. You know, I have played games through ups and downs, and I know somebody's going to be like, oh my God, here we go, Grandpa. Say it. Yes, RuneScape. Okay, I've experienced a developer making literally every wrong decision possible possible, taking one of the most dedicated player bases in the world and driving away players like myself who was obsessed with it for years. But on the flip side, I've seen that same company make so many wonderful decisions and claw their community back one by one and added new players in the process. There's a reason why RuneScape is in the big three when it comes to MMORPGs. It didn't happen by accident. Can I tell you the secret sauce? Listening to your community. Who would have thought? The second video we're going to be making, though, is more of a video on Bungie's leadership. There's some insight I want to give you guys, and I want to talk about it later this week. Probably won't hit until this weekend. It's a very, very long video. It's not going to be a video where I go in there with hellfire and brimstone and damn everybody in leadership at Bungie, but instead assess where we were to where we are now. Because without a doubt, some of those same figures who we as a community lifted up and championed have fallen from grace. More on that soon, guys. Until then, though, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.